G'day, ZiggyD here, finally back with some Diablo 3 news. In this video I'm going to be going over some of the potential upcoming changes to itemization in the game that have been talked about in the recent developer Q&A. So far it's only part 1 of this Q&A on itemization, and part 2 will be coming out soon and it should have some more interesting tidbits, but so far we've got some pretty interesting points of discussion here, towards the future of itemization in Diablo 3. Now obviously itemization is a huge point of discussion in, action RPGs in general. After all, they are all about the loot and about, gearing up your character and having these interesting choices about how you want to gear your character and the builds you want to make and things like that. Diablo 3 is fairly satisfying in this regard, but there is a lot more that can be added to the game in terms of item decision and interesting item stats and the way that items roll and things like that, just making the item hunt in general more interesting. And a lot of these changes they're talking about seem to me like pretty big steps in the right direction, so I'm pretty excited to see what comes of this, but so far we can speculate based on what they've told us. So the first change that they've started talking about is scaling legendaries the same way that rare's currently scaled, and some stats on legendaries have also been scaled in terms of monster eye level. So basically anything that drops in Inferno now is scaled up to the monster eye level. So if you get like a level 59 rare, its stats are going to be scaled up to eye level 63 as long as you're playing in Act 3 or in Act 1 and 2 on Monster Power 1. So everything's scaled up to the monster eye level there. Obviously that was really important because it meant that a lot more gear was just simply usable in Inferno. Finding items in Inferno was pretty rubbish before that change because you just had to sort through so much junk that could never even potentially be useful. But now we've got a lot more items with the potential of being useful, even though if on average they're not usually. But for legendaries, this is pretty exciting because it means that not only the base, like the normal stats on legendary, but also the legendary specific stats can also be scaled. And I'll get back to that a little bit later because it sort of goes into something else that's going to be happening with legendaries, and that is that one of the questions was, does this mean that every set and legendary item will have a chance of dropping in Inferno? Now this is by far the biggest change to legendaries I think that the game will ever have. In the past I talked about these unused assets, like these unused art assets and interesting stuff in the game, like features and gameplay elements of the game that just never get seen because simply you level straight through to Inferno and then you play in Inferno forever and you don't see a lot of those earlier uniques and things like that, those earlier legendaries. Now something that I really enjoy about a lot of action RPGs, Diablo 2, Path of Exile, things like that, is that often legendaries that are low level, even though they might not be so powerful in their base stats, they have something interesting about them, something build defining that means that a lot of them can be used. So to put this in Diablo 3 terms, it's like using a level 32 legendary at level 60, while you're Paragon leveling, because one of the stats on it is really useful. That's in the game a little bit, like you've got things like Legendaries Signet, which is used later on for the experience bonus, but that's pretty much it. There's really not that many that are used. So this sort of is a different solution to that same problem of those legendaries not being used. Instead of giving them these really interesting build defining stats, now they're still going to have the stats that they have, but they're going to instead have their normal base stats scaled up. So it won't be every single stat, like Legendaries Signet experience bonus won't be scaled up, but the other stats on the Legendaries Signet could be scaled up if it drops in Inferno. So what this means is any legendary can drop as long as you're fighting monsters at the minimum level of that legendary. So say the minimum level of a certain legendary is level 25. That's the soonest you can see it drop. From that point onwards, from level 25 to level 60, all the way into the Monster Power 10 endgame in Inferno, that legendary has potential of dropping and will be scaled up to the monster eye level. So that is very exciting because it means that we could potentially be seeing like all these low level legendaries that we've never seen before because we didn't happen to have them drop while we're leveling. We now have the potential of seeing these, and a lot of those have really interesting stats and affixes that you just don't see on the current set of Inferno legendaries and rares and things like that. So that is very exciting because it's simply going to improve the variety of legendaries by a great deal, and a lot of new builds could come out of this as well because there's some really interesting low-level legendaries that have really interesting stats on them, but just simply didn't have the DPS or the main stats to make them worth wearing at the moment. Just because of the importance of these end games DPS and stats and things like that in Diablo 3 they just weren't being used. So this is very exciting because it means that they could be starting to get used once this change goes in. So I'm very excited to see that, and I very much hope that they can put that into the game in a way that works. Obviously, some legendaries, if they just scale them up to Inferno stats, will be a little bit overpowered, but they're going to have to choose some stats that they won't scale and things like that. But they say they're looking into that, so hopefully they can come up with something good from that. So the next point of discussion, the interesting point that comes out of this Q&A is ideas that they're considering for item improvement and crafting. So we heard, before the game came out, about the Mystic and how she could improve your items and things like that, and people were pretty excited about that. Like, that adds a lot more depth and a lot more, personalization to your gear. Like, you can become more personally attached to your gear if you put a lot of effort into making it better. However, that was removed from the game because for whatever reasons it was seen as unbalanced or something like that, or seen as not adding anything to the game. But they still want to look at how they can add that sort of idea of improving your gear and, better, more rewarding crafting into the game. So here's some of the ideas they're considering. None of these are finalized, but these are like what they're looking into, so maybe one of these or something similar will end up going into the game. The first is the ability to change a portion of a particular stat on an item to another stat of your choice. So that could mean something like changing, some of your strength into dexterity. So that means you could, you find an item that could be really good, but one of the stats isn't quite right for you. You could potentially change that stat into something else, for some sort of cost. Maybe have to gather demonic essences to be able to do it as well, or something like that, that gets you playing and gets you more involved in the gear. So that's interesting. The next one is the ability to augment an existing item with a stat bonus of your choice. This one I think has a lot of potential because instead of just saying, you can add more dex to this item, they could come up with a whole new range of affixes that are like minor bonuses, like, you can get more magic fine or potential for extra items to drop, or, all of these different little tiny stats that you can add to your items to very incremental upgrades, but they could cost like a lot of gold or something like that. But if you have like an end game weapon or an end game piece of armor, then you'd be willing to do these little upgrades to it because you plan on keeping that, and it can make the game pretty interesting as well. So there's a lot that they could do with that without like breaking the balance of the game. So I'm pretty interested in that one. The next one is the ability to create an item with one or several fixed affixes, and they've already put this in the game with the rare recipes introduced in 1.0.7 and the Hellfire Ring to a lesser extent. So they could be thinking about adding more of that, and I think they probably will because they already have a precedent of adding that into the game, and so far it's been reasonably successful. And then the final one is, we've also discussed the adding of other types of socketables with a wide variety of possible affixes that you can put into your socketed items instead of gems. So pretty much jewels from Diablo 2, if you're familiar with that. Basically, instead of adding like a gem with, gives you extra dexterity or something into your gear, you can instead add these jewels which have, they're itemized, have their affixes randomly rolled. So you could find these dropping from monsters, and then you can socket them into your gear, and they can give you certain things like, this one jewel might give you some attack speed and life leech, and this other one might give you magic fine and armor, and they can roll all these different stats, and that can make gearing a lot more interesting. That was very popular in Diablo 2, and I'd like to see that in Diablo 3 as well. So hopefully we do see something like that put into the game. And then in terms of the Mystic, how they removed her, they said she's a cunning lady. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of her. It would be nice of them to put her back in, since we rescue her from a quest and then she just sort of disappears. So hopefully she comes back into the game, because that'd be a nice little addition there. And then the final change that they talked about happening, which I'm pretty sure is actually going into the game, like guaranteed, is reducing the overall drop rates but shifting the quality range of things that do drop upwards. So this means you get there's less identification time, less loot to sort through, and an overall increase in power for everyone. So basically, they're going to chop like the bottom 75% of gear, like the worst 75% of gear that you find, and just give you that 25%. Which I think is really good, because rares should be somewhat rare, but they're currently not. You're finding like tons of rares every single farming run you do. You could find hundreds of rares a day, and only get a few really good ones. Well, instead you're just going to get those few really good ones, and then not that many, so you don't have to sort through so many. Obviously this will shift the power up a lot, but that really doesn't have too much of an issue, much of a problem. If you're really under geared when that change goes in, you'll be able to find some upgrades pretty easily, basically. And for anyone else who's already really well geared, it's probably not going to make too much of a difference. So overall, pretty interesting stuff and pretty exciting. I'm always keen to see, Blizzard taking Diablo 3 in the right direction like this and improving itemization and things like that. If you guys have any thoughts on this, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I'll keep you guys posted if any more major changes happens to Diablo 3. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.